The South African government has declared a national disaster, not a regional emergency, not a provincial alert, a formal national disaster declaration, the kind of response that is reserved for events so large, so damaging, and so far beyond the capacity of local systems to manage alone that the full weight of the national government must be brought to bear. That is where Cape Town and the broader Western Cape Province of South Africa find themselves right now, in the middle of one of the most severe multi-hazard weather emergencies this region has seen in years. And as of today, it is still not over. This is the full story of what is happening in South Africa. The scale of the destruction, the human cost, and what this storm tells us about the increasing vulnerability of one of the most iconic cities on Earth. The storm system began building in early May, and from the outset, the South African Weather Service was paying close attention. The initial warnings issued were serious. An orange level 6 alert covering damaging winds and dangerous ocean waves. That is not a minor advisory. A level 6 warning signals conditions that pose a genuine risk to life and property, and it was already enough to put emergency services across the region on notice. But the atmosphere had more to deliver than the models initially captured. As the system intensified and the situation on the ground deteriorated rapidly, the warnings were escalated. The alert was upgraded to a level 8, the highest category for disruptive rainfall on South Africa's national warning scale. To reach level 8, conditions have to be extraordinary. The kind of extraordinary that reshapes landscapes, overwhelms drainage systems built to handle far more than ordinary rainfall, and makes every assumption about where water will and will not go completely unreliable. Meteorologists warned of rainfall totals of between 200 and 300 millimeters across the Boland region within a single 24-hour period. That is a staggering volume of water to fall in one day. The Boland is a mountain and valley region that lies inland and northeast of Cape Town. It feeds the rivers, reservoirs, and drainage systems that flow through and around the city. When the Boland receives rainfall of this intensity, the downstream consequences are felt across the entire metropolitan area and beyond. Combined with wind gusts reaching up to 100 kilometers per hour, the conditions that descended on Cape Town were not simply wet and windy. They were comprehensively dangerous, the kind of weather that does not allow for any safe exposure and that tests every element of a city's infrastructure at once. Gale force winds at this intensity are capable of uprooting fully grown mature trees, tearing roofing material from buildings, and turning ordinary roads into fast-moving rivers as drainage channels overflow and water finds any available path downhill. That is precisely what happened across Cape Town, and it happened with a speed and breadth that stretched emergency services to their limits almost immediately. Roofs were torn from homes across a wide sweep of the city. The destruction was not confined to one district or one socioeconomic area. It moved across the northern suburbs and down through the southern parts of the metropolitan area, leaving a trail of exposed structures, shattered windows, and debris-strewn streets. But while the storm made no distinction in terms of geography, it did reveal, as severe weather events always do, the profound difference between those who have strong, formal housing and those who do not. Informal settlements, the densely packed communities of makeshift structures that house hundreds of thousands of Cape Town's residents, suffered disproportionately and immediately. These communities sit in locations that are often flood-prone by definition, close to waterways and drainage channels, on land that formal development has historically avoided precisely because it is vulnerable. When floodwaters rise, they rise first and fastest in these areas. Entire communities were inundated, cut off by fast-moving water and by canals and streams that had long since exceeded their capacity and overflowed into surrounding streets and homes. For the people living in these settlements, this is not simply a weather emergency. It is the destruction of everything they own and have built, often for the second or third time. But as this storm demonstrated with brutal clarity, even formal residential neighborhoods and commercial areas were not spared. Flooding was reported along major residential streets, at a daycare center, and in low-lying districts that rarely see water levels anywhere near this scale. The storm made no distinction between the wealthy and the vulnerable in terms of its geography. It simply moved through the city and took what the wind and water could take. The human cost became tragically real. One person lost their life after a tree was brought down by the wind onto the vehicle they were traveling in. A second person was injured in a separate but similar incident when another tree collapsed onto their car. These are the kinds of deaths and injuries that happen in severe wind events when trees that have stood for decades are suddenly torn from the ground and become projectiles. Emergency services, already working at maximum capacity across dozens of simultaneous incidents throughout the city, were responding to a constantly expanding list of emergencies in conditions that were themselves dangerous for rescue and response personnel. Displaced residents were provided with hot meals and blankets distributed by humanitarian organizations working alongside city officials at evacuation and relief points across the affected areas. The logistical challenge of reaching those in need was compounded by the fact that major road arteries across the city were closed or severely compromised. Chapman's Peak Drive, one of the most iconic and celebrated coastal routes in South Africa, a road carved into the cliff face above the Atlantic that draws visitors from around the world, was shut down due to the weather and reported rockfalls. Rockfalls were also recorded on other mountain roads in the area, a reminder that sustained heavy rainfall does not just affect flat ground and drainage systems. It saturates hillsides and cliff faces, destabilizing rock formations that then give way without warning. Numerous other roads across the city and metropolitan area were impassable due to flooding or fallen trees, including sections of a major motorway and routes extending as far as Somerset West to the east of the city. Fallen trees brought down power lines across multiple locations, leaving residents without electricity in an already chaotic and dangerous situation. The destruction extended well beyond Cape Town itself. The Garden Route, the famous stretch of coastline and forest that runs east of Cape Town through the Eden District, one of the most beautiful and visited regions in all of southern Africa, had already absorbed serious punishment from an earlier storm system the previous weekend. It had not recovered. Several communities along the Garden Route remained isolated, with roads blocked by debris and fallen trees before this second system arrived and added to the damage already done. Teams were photographed repairing a bridge that floodwaters had damaged in the area, while humanitarian relief teams continued distributing food and blankets to cut off communities still without power and basic services. For these communities, the arrival of this second major storm before the first had even been fully cleaned up represents a compounding emergency that is genuinely difficult to manage. The institutional response has been comprehensive. The Western Cape Provincial Disaster Management Center placed all district disaster management centers across the province on high alert and activated full coordination mechanisms. The City of Cape Town's Disaster Operations Center has been functioning around the clock since the first serious conditions arrived, handling a volume of emergency calls and coordination tasks that pushed its systems to capacity. Emergency hotlines across the city were flooded with calls from residents reporting structural damage, flooding, downed trees, trapped animals, and requests for assistance that covered every imaginable category of storm-related emergency. Schools across multiple education districts were ordered closed as conditions worsened. The closures were initially targeted at specific circuits in the worst affected areas. But by Monday afternoon, the Western Cape Education Department announced that every single school in the entire province would remain closed the following day, May 12th, as conditions continued to deteriorate. That is a decision that affects an enormous number of students, families, and workers simultaneously, and it reflects the genuine assessment by authorities that travel to and from school was simply not safe. National parks and nature reserves have not been immune. Several sections of Table Mountain National Park, one of the most visited natural landmarks on the continent and a site of global ecological significance, have been closed to the public. The famous Boulder's Penguin Colony, a protected area that draws visitors from around the world to see its resident African penguin population, had its forest walkway closed due to fallen trees and branches, with teams mobilized to assess and clear the damage. Hiking trails across multiple nature reserves in the region have been closed until conditions improve and safety assessments can be completed. Coastal areas have also been affected, with foam waves and storm swell forcing the temporary closure of seaside facilities and campsites along the coastline as the ocean continued to respond to the atmospheric energy driving the storm. The impact on daily life beyond the physical destruction has been profound. Public transport routes across the city have been disrupted, leaving workers unable to reach their jobs safely. Businesses have shut their doors as staff cannot travel and as premises have been compromised by water and power loss. Animal welfare organizations have issued urgent appeals for help, reporting a significant surge in distressed and displaced animals requiring veterinary care, pets separated from owners and evacuations, strays driven from their usual shelters by flooding, and animals injured by debris and falling trees across the city. What is unfolding in Cape Town right now is not simply a weather event. It is a stress test of a city and a province at a scale that reveals both what has been built well and where the vulnerabilities lie. Cape Town is a city of extraordinary contrasts, of spectacular natural beauty and deep social inequality, of world-class infrastructure in some areas and critically exposed informal settlements in others. A storm of this magnitude does not treat those contrasts gently. It moves through them and amplifies them, leaving the most exposed communities facing the longest recovery, while the systems built to respond work as hard as they can to reach everyone in need. The National Disaster Declaration opens access to national resources and coordination that the province and city cannot mobilize alone. Recovery will take time. Some communities that were already isolated before this storm arrived are still waiting. And the conversation about why storms of this severity are arriving with increasing frequency. The same conversation happening in New Zealand, in Turkey, in the Philippines, and across the American plains, is now being asked with fresh urgency in South Africa as well. We will continue to follow the situation in Cape Town and the Western Cape and bring you updates as the recovery unfolds. If you want to stay informed on natural events like this from around the world as they happen, subscribe to Nature Report. We cover these stories with accuracy and clarity every time.